Life often feels like it just keeps throwing things at you, doesn't it? These relentless waves.
Hmm.
1 minute you're doing fine, cruising along, and the next, bam, you're right in the middle of a storm.
Yeah,
Could be something unexpected at work, maybe a personal setback, or, just the everyday grind wearing you down.
absolutely. We all hit those points.
We do. And you get to these crossroads, right?
Yeah.
Where you feel like you could just throw your hands up, or you could try and dig deep somehow. Find your footing, push forward.
That's the choice.
Exactly. So today, we're going to do a deep dive into something really powerful, something that kind of shapes how we handle all of that. We're talking about optimism.
Hmm.
And we've gathered quite a stack of sources for this one. We've got everything from like serious clinical psychological research, some really key studies from the last few decades.
Right, the foundational stuff.
Yeah, and practical guides too, like Terry Paulson's The Optimism Advantage, plus some really quite inspiring stories from real life that kind of bring it all home.
And our goal today really is to unpack optimism properly, to look beyond, the usual ideas about it.
Yeah, not just happy thoughts.
Not at all. This isn't about some kind of blind, naive positivity where you just ignore reality. No. We want to explore optimism as a powerful, really actionable personal trait, something that varies a lot between people.
Okay.
Fundamentally, it reflects the extent to which people hold sort of generalized favorable expectancies for their future.
So basically, do you generally expect good things to happen, even when it's tough?
Precisely. And we'll be looking at its impact, which is profound, not just on how you feel your subjective well-being, but on your actual physical health, your relationships, even your success at work.
Wow.
And importantly, we'll really dig into how you can actually intentionally cultivate this trait for yourself.
That advantage part you mentioned from Paulson's, that feels really key.
It is.
He's great at showing how real, grounded optimism isn't just, a feeling. It actually translates into real-world results. Positive outcomes. Yeah. So think of this deep dive as maybe a shortcut for you, a way to understand how you can use this powerful characteristic to handle your own life better, to face reality, sure, but still find a way forward that works for you and, the people around you. Okay, so let's unpack this. When you hear the word optimism, what jumps into your head first? For most people, I bet it's someone who's just always cheerful, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even seems a little disconnected from reality sometimes. Always seeing the bright side no matter what.
Common image, yeah, like a Pollyanna.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we want to challenge that right away because the research tells a very different story. True optimism is, well, it's much deeper and more impactful than just being in a good mood. It's a fundamental way you engage with life.
It really is. And, optimism is actually a pretty robust area of scientific study now. It's got history, thanks to pioneers like Charles Carver, Michael Shire, Suzanne Segerstrom. Their work was groundbreaking. And as the big review article from PubMed Central makes really clear, this is way more than just wishful thinking. The core idea, like we said, is holding generalized favorable expectancies for one's future.
So expecting good things.
Yes, but it's not about ignoring problems. It's more like a proactive stance. You anticipate positive outcomes, sure, but you also believe you can influence things even when things are uncertain.
Right, belief in your own agency, maybe.
Exactly. And the benefits linked to this kind of genuine, grounded optimism, they're pretty striking. They cover a lot of ground.
Like what?
Well, first off, the research consistently shows optimism links prospectively, meaning looking forward in time to better subjective well-being, especially when life throws you a curveball during adversity.
Okay.
And this holds up even when you factor in how well someone was doing before the tough time hit. So it's not just that happy people happen to be optimistic. Optimism actually helps you feel better and more capable when things get rough.
That's a key difference.
It is. Second, optimists tend to use more engagement coping.
Engagement coping, meaning
Meaning they actively deal with problems head on. They make plans, they look for information, they take action. They don't tend towards avoidance coping as much. Ignoring the problem, withdrawing, stuff that's usually less effective.
so they lean in rather than pull back.
That's a great way to put it. And that active approach is a huge differentiator. Then look at health. The connection is just as strong. Optimism is strongly associated with taking proactive steps to protect your health.
How so?
Well, optimists tend to be the ones who actually seek out information about health risks, learn about prevention. They're generally more vigilant about their well-being instead of just hoping for the best.
Okay.
Pessimism, on the other hand, often correlates with health-damaging behaviors. Things like skipping checkups, poor diet, maybe a kind of fatalism about health outcomes.
What's the point anyway, kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah. And crucially, this isn't just about behavior. Studies link optimism to actual, measurable indicators of better physical health, not just feeling healthier.
Wow, okay.
And beyond personal health, there are real socioeconomic benefits too. Research keeps showing optimism relates to sticking with education longer, which, down the line, can lead to higher income and better careers.
Makes sense. Persistence pays off.
It does. And relationships. Optimists generally do better there, too. They tend to be liked more, they see their relationships more positively, and, importantly, they put more effort into solving problems and nurturing those connections, keeping them strong.
It's amazing how this one trait seems to touch almost everything.
It's quite pervasive.
Joanne Chan, she's the CEO at Turner Duckworth, that big branding agency.
Uh-huh.
She talks about relentless optimism. I love that phrase. She says, it facilitates the result that every company strives for a culture and output that makes you, your team, and clients smile while always aiming for even better.
That captures it well.
Yeah, it's not just about one person feeling good. It's about creating this whole environment. Could be at home, could be at work, where that positive, proactive outlook actually drives results, drives improvement. It's like an engine, really.
A positive engine for progress.
Yeah. But, okay, what about the flip side? It all sounds incredibly positive, and clearly the advantages are huge. But that PubMed source did mention, briefly, these extremely rare cases where optimism might be a disadvantage.
Right.
That kind of makes you pause, doesn't it?
Right.
Because we tend to think of it as always good. What would those situations even look like? Could you be too optimistic? Maybe overlook something important?
That's a really smart question, and it's important because, like we said, true optimism isn't blind. Those rare instances, they usually involve situations where someone has an unrealistic or maybe an unwarranted level of optimism.
Okay.
So maybe they ignore genuine threats or take massive risks without doing their homework. You could imagine maybe in a truly hopeless situation where there's nothing someone can do, being overly optimistic might stop them from, say, accepting help or preparing realistically.
Like denial almost.
Exactly. But the key thing is the kind of optimism we're really talking about today, the resilient kind. It's not magical thinking. It includes a belief in your ability to cope, yes, but that often involves a realistic look at the challenges.
It's grounded.
It's grounded, not denial. So while, yes, theoretically there might be tiny edge cases of ungrounded optimism causing problems, the overwhelming evidence points to profound advantages basically everywhere else in life. And building right on that point about being grounded, let's shift to how optimists really handle it when problems do hit, when challenges pop up.
Okay, the tough times.
Yeah. Terry Paulson, in his book, talks about learning to deal with the hand you're dealt. And what's really striking is that even when things are objectively difficult, really hard, optimists still tend to expect good outcomes eventually.
Even then.
Even then. It's not naivete, it's this deep inner resilience. And that fosters what he calls a relatively positive mix of feelings, even during intense stress. Pessimists, though, because they're kind of wired to expect the worst, they often get hit with a wave of negative feelings, anxiety, anger, sadness, even despair.
So it's not about whether the storm hits, but how you ride it out inside.
Precisely, how you psychologically navigate it. And researchers have really put optimism to the test against some of life's toughest situations. The range of studies is incredible.
Like what kind of situations?
Well, think about students starting college. Big transition, lots of stress. They've studied optimism there. They've looked at survivors of missile attacks. Imagine the trauma and how optimism acted as a psychological shield.
Wow.
They've studied caregivers, people looking after cancer patients, or spouses with Alzheimer's situations with immense long-term emotional and physical strain.
Yeah, incredibly draining.
Definitely. And maybe most convincingly, optimism has been studied intensely in major health crises. Things like childbirth, coronary artery bypass surgery, the heartbreak of failed IVF, bone marrow transplants, dealing with cancer breast, head and neck, even the progression of diseases like AIDS or heart disease.
So really serious life events.
The most serious. And what all these diverse studies show again and again is that optimism isn't just a mood, it's like a core survival tool, a consistent predictor of resilience, even when facing truly brutal realities. Let me give you a few specific examples of this resilience in action.
Okay.
One study looked at women diagnosed with breast cancer. They found that the women who were more optimistic right at diagnosis reported significantly less distress over the entire following year.
Whole year.
A whole year. And that was even after accounting for the medical details and how distressed they were initially. It points to this sustained, proactive kind of resilience.
That's powerful.
Isn't it? Another study found optimistic women had better moods both before and after a breast cancer biopsy. And this was true even if the biopsy came back positive, meaning they got bad news.
Wow.
With head and neck cancer patients, optimists reported higher quality of life both before and after treatment, despite going through really tough medical stuff.
So they maintained it.
They did. And conversely, look at ischemic heart disease. One study found that less optimism was directly linked to more symptoms of depression soon after being hospitalized, and that negative feeling often lingered even a year later.
So it has lasting effects both ways.
Absolutely. These examples just make it crystal clear. Optimism isn't just some fleeting feeling. It's a vital internal resource for staying well when life gets incredibly hard.
That really brings Polson's idea of your choice, victim or resilient survivor, into focus.
Exactly.
It's all about agency, isn't it? He quotes Mark Twain, the famous line, "Don't go around saying the world owes you a living, the world owes you nothing. It was here first."
Oh. Classic Twain.
Right. And optimists seem to get that. They refuse to let setbacks define them or limit them. They get that they can't control everything that happens to them, but they absolutely control how they choose to respond, how they play the hand they're dealt.
It's a fundamental shift from feeling passive to being actively engaged, and this connects perfectly to something called the Stockdale Paradox.
Stockdale Paradox.
Yeah, Jim Collins wrote about it. Admiral James Stockdale was a U.S. prisoner of war in Vietnam for, I think, over 7 years. Horrific torture. He survived, but many others didn't.
What was his secret?
It was this dual mindset. Collins described it as maintaining unwavering faith that you can and will prevail in the end, regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time, have the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality.
Faith and brutal facts. That sounds contradictory.
It sounds it, but it's key. True optimists aren't in denial. Often, they're the first ones to look realistically at how bad things are. They don't ignore the bad news, they process it. And then they figure out, okay, what can I actually do about this?
So it's realism plus action.
It's a blend of stubborn faith and clear-eyed realism. Really powerful in a crisis.
Michael J. Fox, dealing with Parkinson's, seems to embody that perfectly.
Absolutely.
He said that figuring out how to live with it had very little to do with protection and everything to do with perspective. He said the only unavailable choice was whether or not to have Parkinson's. Everything else was up to me.
Wow.
Yeah. He realized he could either focus on what he'd lost, or he could choose to just get on with life and maybe see if the holes started filling in for themselves. It's about finding where you still have control, where you have agency, even when the big picture feels totally out of your hands.
Shifting from victim to maybe manager of his circumstances.
Exactly.
And if we dig a bit deeper into how optimists actually cope day to day, studies confirm they're usually approach copers. Pessimists tend to be avoidant copers.
Okay, approach versus avoid.
Right. Optimists actively engage with challenges, even painful ones. So, for example, with patients facing bypass surgery, the optimists were found to be making plans for the future, setting recovery goals before the surgery even happened.
Proactive.
Very. Afterwards, they actively sought out information about their recovery, they participated more, they were less likely to just suppress thoughts about their symptoms they faced it. They also manage to find humor sometimes and accept the reality of it all. They focus on what they can influence.
And the pessimists, the avoidant cuppers.
They tend towards things like focusing only on the negative stuff, trying to push thoughts away, sometimes outright denial, giving up, or looking for escape routes.
Donkey behaviors.
Yeah. There was a really sad study about couples who went through failed IVF. Pessimism was directly linked to using escape as a coping strategy, which unsurprisingly led to more distress after the failure.
That makes sense.
But the optimists in that same study, they were more likely to say, they actually benefited from the experience, somehow maybe felt closer to their partner or gained a new perspective. It shows a totally different way of processing adversity.
And you can see how this relates to the bigger picture, right? This victim thinking or avoidance.
Nah.
It feels like it gets fueled sometimes by, just constantly watching negative news.
It can, yeah. Information overload of negativity.
Paulson's advice there is so sharp. Get busy making your own. Stop watching the bad news, make some good news.
Huh. I like that.
He gives these great examples, like the Cook family in Mississippi. After Katrina, they had very little themselves, but they just opened their home to strangers who'd lost everything. No hesitation.
Incredible generosity.
Or Stan Tyner, he was a newspaper editor during Katrina, lost so much. His mantra became, I'm still standing, focusing on gratitude, on action, despite everything.
What?
And think about 9/11, the resilience after that, the initial shock, the fear. But leaders, workers, they just refused to let it pull everything under. They acted like warriors, Paulson says. It wasn't denial. It was practical realism mixed with this incredible spirit.
Facing the facts, then acting.
Exactly. American optimism, as he puts it, isn't based on denial or wishful thinking. It stands on a rock-solid history of overcoming obstacles, setbacks, and wars. It's about facing the facts, however brutal, and then acting with courage.
Okay, so this is all fascinating about coping with tough times. But what does it mean for you, just day to day?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Because optimism doesn't just help you bounce back. It actually seems to promote overall well-being and proactive behavior in your everyday life.
That's exactly right. It's not just about resilience after something happens. It's about building a life that's inherently more robust.
Like prevention, almost.
Precisely. Optimism fosters what the researchers call preventive or proactive coping. It's not just reacting to stress, it's taking steps to stop problems from starting, or at least lessening their impact before they get big. It's looking ahead.
Okay, how does that show up, especially in health?
Well, it shows up profoundly in health promotion. Optimists often act like seekers of knowledge. For instance, one study found optimistic middle-aged adults actually knew more about heart attack risk factors.
Oh, they educate themselves.
They do. They don't ignore potential threats. They pay attention to the meaningful risks, the serious stuff relevant to them, rather than getting bogged down in minor worries. They're good at scanning for threats, but then they save their energy for acting on the important ones.
Smart allocation of worry energy.
You could say that. And beyond just knowing things, they consistently show healthier behaviors.
Like actually doing stuff.
Exactly. Studies found optimism predicted better success in lowering saturated fat, losing body fat, increasing exercise, and cardiac rehab programs.
Real changes.
Real changes. 5 years after bypass surgery, optimists were more likely to be taking vitamins, eating low-fat foods, enrolling in rehab. They weren't just recovering, they were actively maintaining their health long-term.
Wow.
Even in risk reduction. Like, one study found HIV-negative gay men who were optimistic reported fewer anonymous sexual partners. That suggests conscious efforts to stay safe.
Yeah.
And this proactive approach even shows up physically, inside the body. Studies have tracked carotid intima thickness, that's a marker for artery health, predicts heart disease risk. Over 3 years, greater pessimism predicted increases in that thickness. But the optimists, they showed almost no increase.
That's incredible. It's not just in their heads.
It's physiological, measurable differences.
Which ties right into Paulson's advice, which is pretty blunt. Optimists build healthy habits.
Simple but true.
He just says, take care of your body, or it just may not take care of you. And he talks about the basics, eat less and exercise more. Not revolutionary, but fundamental.
It's foundation.
Right. But what's really interesting is how he links exercise directly to attitude. Research backs this up constantly, right? Exercise reduces stress, anxiety, mild depression.
Boosts endorphins, norepinephrine, serotonin.
Yeah, all those feel-good chemicals. It's a direct link between moving your body and feeling better mentally.
Yeah.
Not just about weight, but about having this robust, energetic body and mind ready for whatever comes next.
It's a powerful synergy. And moving beyond just physical health, Paulson talks about the optimistic power of purpose.
Purpose, okay.
This is the idea that dedicating yourself to something bigger, to making a difference for others, actually transforms your own optimistic attitude and feelings. It's like a feedback loop.
Helping others helps you.
Exactly. Think of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor.
Right, man's search for meaning.
He taught us so much about finding meaning even in the absolute worst circumstances. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." It's about finding that internal reason to keep going.
An internal anchor.
Yes, and this idea of purpose works on an organizational level, too. Paulson talks about companies needing a clear vision, but it has to be lived by torchbearers, people who genuinely care about moving forward.
People who are passionate?
Right. He mentions Maria Dotson at Quintiles. Instead of just assigning roles, when a new project comes up, she asks, who wants to be involved? She recruits for passion. That creates shared purpose, more motivation, more innovation, a collective optimistic drive.
That makes so much sense.
And it applies just as much to your personal purpose. The source really emphasizes life is too short to stay in a job that you don't like.
A wake-up call for many, maybe.
It's an encouragement to risk becoming the architect of your own future, to actively seek out work and pursuits that give you real significance, real satisfaction. Paulson even shares how he found his own calling, and speaking took a paid gig almost as a fluke, and it turned into his passion. Sometimes you find purpose by doing.
You don't always have to have it all figured out first.
It's not at all. Professor Kate Gold, who runs that amazing program, Relentless Optimism for people with brain injury.
Yes, you mentioned her.
She works with adults who've had severe brain injuries, helping them rebuild meaningful lives. She says, point blank, optimism's absolutely essential in this. Otherwise, why even start if you don't hope things will improve?
Wow.
She believes in relentless optimism, that there's always something that works, and it's our job to figure that out together. It just perfectly shows how a clear purpose fuels that persistent problem-solving optimism, especially when the road is really, really tough.
That's incredibly moving. The idea that purpose fuels optimism, like Elise's story from Columbine.
Yeah.
After the tragedy, her purpose led her back to work there. She said, by helping others cope, we help ourselves. That feedback loop again. Pouring energy into a cause, into others, it refills your own tank.
It really does.
So what does this mean for you listening right now? It's maybe an invitation to look at your own life. Are you stuck in purpose paralysis, waiting for some grand lightning bolt moment? Or could you start aligning your calendar with your actual values, what truly gives your life meaning? Because, as the source says so wisely, what you put in your calendar tends to get done.
Action follows intention.
Right. Take small, deliberate steps every day towards what matters. That seems to be the key.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered a lot about how optimism affects actions, how it helps in tough times, but let's really shift focus now inward.
Oh, okay.
Let's dig into the internal work. This is all about what happens inside your head, inside you. How can you actively cultivate a more optimistic mindset through specific thoughts and habits? Less about big external things, more about the quiet stuff.
This is crucial, and it really starts with what Paulson calls optimists dispute catastrophic thought.
Dispute them, like argue with yourself.
In a way, yes. But it's important to understand this isn't just naive positive thinking, like telling yourself everything's wonderful when it's not. Martin Seligman, who developed Learn Optimism.
Right, a big name in this field.
He emphasized it's about accuracy. It's about facing and taking advantage of reality, even when reality is uncomfortable. You know, if 100 salespeople just visualize success, only one actually makes the sale. Optimism isn't ignoring facts, it's interpreting them constructively.
Interpreting them in a way that helps, not hinders.
Exactly. Seligman gave us the ABCs of self-talk. A is adversity, the event, the setback.
The bad thing that happened.
Right. B is your beliefs about that adversity, the story you tell yourself about why it happened, what it means.
Your interpretation.
Precisely. And C is the consequences, how you feel, what you do next. And the B, the belief, directly drives the C, the consequences. Our internal dialogue shapes our reality.
Okay, A, B, C, adversity, beliefs, consequences.
So the key skill is disputing beliefs, challenging those negative automatic thoughts. Paulson suggests the Joe Friday test, just the facts, ma'am. Exactly. Strip away the emotional spin, get to the objective truth. Like, a cancer diagnosis is a brutal fact. Awful. But optimists, Paulson says, don't disregard the mortality statistics. They just do what they can to make their survival more likely. They face facts, then focus on their agency.
Find what they can control.
Yes. Remember Randy Pausch, the last lecture?
Of course. So powerful.
He said, experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. We can't change the cards we are dealt, just the way we play them. It's accepting reality without despair, finding your power within it. Disputing also means looking for alternative explanations, especially ones that aren't globally self-blaming, finding less self-destructive causes.
Okay, give me an example.
The source mentions someone failing a medical exam. Initial thought, I'm stupid, I'll never pass. Catastrophic.
Right.
But investigating, they learned they actually failed to fully read one of the questions. and gave a great answer to the wrong question. See the difference? It goes from, I'm inherently flawed, to, I made a specific correctable mistake.
Much less damaging.
Way less. Or the salesperson who loses a deal. Instead of, I'm a terrible salesperson, they find out the winner was the client's brother-in-law. External factor, not personal failing. It allows learning without crushing your spirit. And then there's getting perspective on the consequences. Asking yourself, in 5 years, will this matter? That can really dial down the catastrophizing.
Shrinks the problem down to size.
Exactly. That story about the violinist whose string breaks mid-performance.
Yeah.
He just kept playing beautifully on the remaining 3, the lesson. Sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. Focus on what remains, not just what's lost.
Powerful metaphor.
And finally, learning to let go of worry. Ruminating often makes things worse, keeps you stuck. Is worrying actually helping? The client who literally buried the ashes of his problem, kind of funny, but it signifies achieving closure, moving on.
Okay, so dispute thoughts, find alternatives, get perspective, let go of worry. That's a lot of internal work.
It is, but it's learnable.
Which leads nicely to this next idea. Managing your own motivation means catching yourself being effective.
Yes. This is about conscious self-affirmation.
Because most of us are our own worst critics, right?
Mm-hmm.
The source says something like 80% of internal dialogue is negative for most people.
It's often true. We're harder on ourselves than anyone else.
So the advice is kind of radical. Catch yourself being effective. Notice when you do something well. Mark Twain said, when you cannot get a compliment any other way, pay yourself one.
Love that.
It's not about being arrogant. It's about intentionally recognizing your own progress, your small wins daily. That manager, Jack Nichols, he'd ask his team every week, what's working for you?
Making them reflect on positives.
Yeah. Forcing them to track successes, build pride, not just wait for praise. It's a really practical way to boost your own motivation and optimism.
Another tool, maybe an unexpected one, is embracing simple pleasures. Paulson calls them the optimist's wild card.
Simple pleasures, like what?
Like those uncomplicated, unpretentious experiences that can just turn a bad day around. Remember the story of the kids in Mexico playing with just a hubcap and a stick?
Yeah, finding joy in almost nothing.
Exactly. It shows simple, shared pleasures clearly don't have to cost a lot of money. It's about finding delight in what's easily accessible.
Things we might overlook.
Often. Paulson talks about his own hobbies, like needlepoint or woodworking. He says the mindless finger movements are actually therapeutic, like a mental break, active meditation almost, reduces stress.
I'd see that.
Or that incredibly moving story of Diana Harbert's making one more hug quilts from her late husband's clothes, transforming grief into something comforting, therapeutic, meaningful.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Music, too, is highlighted as a huge, simple pleasure, can totally shift your mood. And pets, we know the benefits. Studies show pet owners over 65 made 30% fewer doctor visits. These are all everyday ways to actively nurture a more optimistic outlook.
Little injections of joy and calm.
Exactly.
And then there's humor. Humor is the joker in the hand of life.
Another great Paulson phrase.
Viktor Frankl, back to him again, called laughter the currency of hope. Finding humor, even in concentration camps. It just shows its incredible power to maintain dignity and optimism.
It's amazing.
And it's not just mental. Laughter has real health benefits, right? Reduces stress hormones, boosts endorphins.
Nature's painkillers. Helps manage pain, relaxes muscles.
Like a non-fattening, contagious, pleasant tranquilizer, as the source puts it.
Huh. Good description.
But crucially, it's about the right kind of humor. Not cynicism or sarcasm that puts people down.
No, positive humor.
Yeah, humor that brings people together, encourages creativity, connection. Think of that couple who lost everything in the California fire.
Oh, I remember that image.
Standing there, joking about only escaping in their underwear, in the face of total devastation. It showed this incredible ability to find light, connect, start bouncing back.
Resilience through humor.
So how do you cultivate that? The source suggests practical things. Keep a humor file, cartoons, jokes you like, use one-liners sometimes, like some days you're the bug, some days the windshield. Just actively inviting lightness and perspective.
So we've done a lot on the internal work, which is foundational. But optimism doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It really thrives and grows with external support.
The people around you matter.
Hugely. Paulson's chapter, Build an Optimistic Network That Works, really drives this home. It comes down to the company you keep, because your environment shapes your outlook.
Makes sense.
Mark Twain again. Keep away from people who try to belittle your ambitions. Small people always do that. But the really great make you feel that you too can become great. Your network influences your attitude, your dreams, your sense of what's possible.
To choose your circle wisely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actively seek out mentors and encouragers. Those people who genuinely believe in you, see your potential, bring out your best. Albert Schweitzer talked about those who lighted the flame within us.
We all need people like that.
We do. And if you're struggling to think of anyone like that in your life right now, the source suggests, gently, that maybe you have some important work to do in building those kinds of relationships. They offer perspective, guidance, belief. And prioritizing these relationships is key. It takes intention, like Tony Newman's vacation auto-reply.
That undivided attention one.
Yeah. Saying she was giving 2 weeks of my undivided attention to her family. It's a powerful example of putting your calendar where your priorities are.
Because work will just expand otherwise.
Exactly. Work conveniently expands to fill your available time if you let it, often squeezing out important personal connections. Finding that balance is critical for sustained optimism, energy, preventing burnout. You need more than just work buddies. You need friends for fun, deep connections, shared interests, a whole support system. And the source is pretty direct about avoiding pits people and worrywarts.
Huh? Pits people. Love it.
You know them. The ones always complaining, the economy is the pits, this company is the pits. They just want you to join their pity party.
They can really drain your energy.
Totally. You need to spot them. Maybe try talking to them about dialing back the negativity, if that doesn't work. Paulson says basically, run away, protect your own well-being.
Sometimes you have to.
Emmy Verner's resilience study is relevant here. She tracked kids for decades. Those who overcame really tough backgrounds often do so because they found emotional support from outside their troubled families. It highlights how crucial a supportive community, friends, mentors, whoever, is for resilience.
Finding your tribe.
Exactly, which connects to the idea of fill your village. Barbara Ehrenreich observed, "Today we don't marry a person, we attempt to marry a village."
Meaning one person can't be everything.
Precisely. You can't expect your spouse or partner to meet all your support needs. Different relationships offer different things. Having a diverse network makes it robust, prevents over-reliance.
And this network needs to be real, right? Not just online.
Yes, beyond cyberspace. Digital connections are fine for quick updates, sharing info. But John Patrick points out, the ability to sell, explain, persuade still requires the ability to make people like you, respect you, listen to you, and want to connect to you. And by connect, I mean connect personally, not digitally.
Face-to-face builds real trust.
Deeper trust, empathy, genuine support that's hard to fully replicate online. Finally, the source mentions strategic alumni and catalysts.
Okay.
Mentoring colleagues, even if they leave, that builds a valuable network. They become strategic alumni who remember your support, might help you later. And catalysts. They're fascinating. They're hub people who boost trust and connection in their networks.
The connectors.
Yeah, they help out, bridge gaps, build relationships. They make the whole network stronger and more effective.
It's amazing how our actions show our priorities, especially with relationships. That story about the guy in the business meeting.
The lucky hat?
Yeah. High-stakes meeting, about to close a deal. Stops everything to take a picture in his lucky hat for his son's game because he promised.
Takes guts.
Totally. But the client was so impressed by his commitment to his family, his integrity, that it actually helped seal the deal. His personal values positively impacted his professional outcome. It just shows how these things are all connected.
Okay.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on optimism, let's try and pull it all together. The big takeaway, your future optimism.
Yeah.
Sure, it depends on things you can't control. But mostly, it depends on you, your choices.
Yeah, that's the core message.
No magic wand, no quick fix. But there is a path, a practical roadmap to becoming more of a grounded, realistic optimist.
Yes. Paulson's chapter, How to Become Optimistic in Life by Really Trying, pulls it together nicely. It starts with that fundamental truth. You're a survivor, not a victim. You always have choices in how you respond.
Always agency.
Always. Then, realistic evaluation. Optimists don't ignore problems. They face them, get the facts, and then they act purposefully.
Action is key.
Crucial, which leads to do something positive every day. Small, consistent steps add up. Take care of your body. Build healthy habits. We saw how vital diet, exercise, sleep are for mind and body.
The foundations again.
Then, constructive self-criticism. Learn from mistakes without beating yourself up. See errors as data, not proof of failure.
Learn and adjust.
Exactly. Be purpose-driven. Find and live your mission. Align your actions with your values. Incorporate simple pleasures daily. Find those small joys. Use humor, positive humor, as a tool and a connector. Build that optimistic network. Surround yourself with supportive people.
Your village.
Your village. And finally, never stop learning. Update your gifts into recyclable assets, Paulson says. Be a lifelong learner. Adapt. Stay curious. That keeps you capable, relevant, and optimistic about the future.
Okay, that's a great summary of the what's. But how do you actually apply this? How do you, listening now, make this stick? Don't let this just be interesting information that fades away.
Good point. Actionable steps.
Right. First, maybe identify your keepers. From everything we talked about, pick maybe just 3 things that really resonated with you, 3 insights you want to work on. Keep it focused.
Manageable chunks.
Exactly. Second, turn those keepers into specific, measurable goals. Not just be more optimistic, but spend 10 minutes journaling gratitudes each morning, or reach out to one supportive friend each week. Make it concrete.
Tangible.
Third, use your calendar. Schedule it in. Make time for it. What gets scheduled gets done, right?
Eventually, yes.
Fourth, celebrate your progress. Even tiny steps. Be your own pride builder. Remember Mike Piazza, the minute you think about hitting a home run is when you don't. Focus on the small wins, the consistent effort.
Acknowledge the journey.
Fifth, get support. Find accountability partners, friends, family, colleagues who can cheer you on, check in, keep you on track.
Share the load.
Sixth, visualize success. Mentally rehearse. Imagine yourself acting and feeling more optimistic in specific situations. See it happening. Seventh, treat lapses as learning opportunities. Setbacks will happen. Don't see them as failure. See them as data. A chance to learn and bounce back even stronger.
Reframe the setback.
Eighth, keep learning. Nurture that curiosity. Read more, listen more, reflect more, draw on new stuff, but also timeless wisdom like that Martin book from 1907. Truths reappear. And finally, reward yourself. Celebrate milestones with your support team. Don't wait till the very end. Acknowledge achievements along the way. Like John Mackey at Whole Foods doing voluntary appreciations. Recognize the good stuff.
That's a really practical set of steps. And it leads back to the idea that optimism is a flexible destination. Persistence is great, but only if you're heading somewhere useful, you need that flexibility.
Right. Knowing when to stick with it and when to pivot.
Exactly. As the saying goes, no matter how nice the horse, if the horse is dead, you better get off it. Adaptability is key. Informed adaptation.
Absolutely. Woody Allen said half of life is showing up, which is true. But maybe the other half, the part we explored today, is doing something with the day once you do show up. Making it count, being intentional, striving to be the best you can be today, knowing that cultivating optimism really does change things.
And maybe a final thought for you to take away and chew on.
All right.
True optimism, the deep, resilient kind, often comes not from avoiding defeat, but from having a track record of recovering from it, finding new ways to win after you've lost. It's not the absence of failure, but the persistence through failure, the learning from failure, that really builds that unshakable, optimistic core.
Wow. That reframes adversity completely. Not just something to endure, but maybe something necessary to build real optimism.
Potentially something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. It brings to mind Reinhold Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, which feels like a perfect place to land. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Until next time, keep diving deep.